Welcome to the 12th episode of Character Evolution Cast, everyone. Today's episode is featuring me as guest co-host, Marie-Claire Gould. Ryan and I will be discussing the psychology of artificial intelligence and figuring out how to bring that to the table. But first, announcements as usual.
Yeah. Nothing too big to announce right now. So we'll just be reminding you that if you like what we're doing here, there are a few ways that you can show your appreciation. First, if you want to support us financially, you can head on over to the One Shot Podcast Patreon at patreon.com/One Shot Podcast. And lend support there. Not only will that support this show, but it will also support all of the other shows on the network, as well as helping out James D'Amato, since this is his livelihood. You could also hear the latest Character Creation Cast bonus episode, which is the audio from our Acadicon 2018 panel, where myself, Amelia, and James dive into the backstory of Amelia's and my characters from our Deadlands series. And you might be familiar with Dirge Stranglethorn if you listen to those series. And we flesh it out pretty succinctly, I think, and it's pretty remarkable piece of audio. So please go check that out. Otherwise, you can leave a rating or review at any of the regular places, and we would be so delighted to read more of those.
We don't have any other big announcements right now, so let's get on with the show.
Yeah, enjoy. Welcome to Character Evolution Cast, everyone, a show where we discuss what to do with all those characters we just made. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan, and today my special guest co-host Marie-Claire and I are by ourselves to talk to you about artificial intelligence and how we can take a better understanding of this mindset to the table when playing these sorts of characters. So, welcome back, Marie-Claire. It's really great to have you on again.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Yeah.
I feel like I've already kind of mastered this by being the show segment voice. I went for artificial intelligence or like voice of the computer. So
yeah, that combined with your absolute love of droids in Star Wars,
yes,
is the exact reason why I wanted to do this topic with you.
I'm also like a big fan of Data personally from Star Trek. So yeah, I think I have a lot to contribute to this conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I think we're both on the same wavelength with a lot of that. So I think this will be really fun.
Yay.
Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit in the last cold open, but I'd be remiss if we didn't learn a bit more about you, Marie-Claire, in our Getting to Know You segment. Since one of our goals on Character Creation Cast, aside from making amazing people, is to introduce our audience to people who are doing awesome things in the RPG world, I have some questions for you.
Ooh.
All right. So now you have a fascinating history with role-playing games. Would it be all right to ask about your dad's contribution to the RPG world and what it was like growing up in an environment where role-playing games were pretty much present from the start?
Very much present from the start. So my dad is Wilf K. Backhouse, and he is known within the RPG world as being one of the co-creators of a game called Chivalry and Sorcery, which now has multiple editions and has gone past, and he's no longer creating it because unfortunately he's also passed. But he was very much into wargaming in university and continued that love into RPGs, as he also had a massive love for fantasy novels and fantasy worlds. and history and, anthropology and all of those aspects. He started playing D&D pretty much right from the beginning because the same people that were like into war games also flocked to D&D as soon as it came out. And he noticed that he had this one DM that was really into making, the dungeon kind of anything he wanted, which is cool. And actually, one of the things that maybe made him want to create his own game was because the dungeon master in the middle of their fantasy dungeon, I think he was playing a fighter or something like that. The dungeon master brought in like basically a Terminator type robot into the dungeon that had been traveling from the future. And my dad was like, what is this like robot doing in my fantasy adventure? So he created a more pure version in his mind of what a medieval fantasy role-playing game would look like. And that was originally called Chevalier, which, it means chivalry, right? It was about being a knight and, having wizards and things like that around you. And it was a very short, it was a very small RPG, and then it was expanded to be chivalry and sorcery with these massive rules on how to actually, produce magic, and like magical creatures were very rare, but you could get them. Like you had to roll them on a table to become like a fairy or like become an elf. Like it just was harder to be those things because they were less likely to be seen in kind of a very high fantasy pure version. And yeah, it was very they kind of created their own world, which maybe was a little less driven directly into the fantasy and more realistic fantasy, I would say. And some people describe playing chivalry and sorcery like when you want to play a wizard, it's like you actually have to be a wizard because there's like math involved and stuff like that. And so he created that with a man named Ed Zimbalist, and it was second to D&D in the 80s from an RPG perspective.
Oh, nice.
And, he attended Gen Cons and like, continued on and wrote other role-playing games. And this was like when like people just didn't write role-playing games. I like, it's kind of weird to say that, like, and in the 90s, there was a revamped version of it made, and I'm actually one of the playtesters on that version. And, it's been taken from there, and other people have, taken the license and have worked with it and everything like that. But, from a young age, I think I was maybe in grade 5, we started playing West End games, Star Wars RPG. I played from an early age D&D because, more people knew that system. I played chivalry and sorcery, of course. I played in high school. I joined a vampire like tabletop game. I also played in a mage game. I also played in a werewolf game. Like I explored all of the different aspects of RPGs because my dad really encouraged me to be like, well, RPGs are fun. RPGs are these things. And I always felt like I always felt like I had a place in the community. And he also inspired like my cousins to take on role playing when at the time, like growing up in this small town that I grew up in Canada, like the D&D books were being like taken away from people still.
Yeah.
And people were being told like, oh, that's satanic. How dare you? It wasn't. And my dad was like, that's ridiculous. So I feel very lucky to have had that background and to basically be told just through his example, hey, if it doesn't exist for you, just make it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I really like, because most people, when you ask them, how did you get into role-playing games? They say, well, I was in school and one of my friends had their book out, or my cousin had their book, and I was like, well, what is that? But you kind of were born into it. And
my dad
never, just how I was there.
Yeah, my dad never pushed it on me, though. He never said, and I respect my dad a lot for this, in that he never said, oh, we're doing this, you know, because I think that would have turned me off of it. He actually he waited for me to say, you know, hey, Dad, can we do this? This seems interesting. It was just always around. And he would like have role playing nights with his friends. Yeah. He would have, friends over, and I would sit there and like, it was like watching almost Twitch streams now of RPGs, sit there and like be quiet and like eating my snacks, like watching these adults play these RPGs, like in a living room, you know, just like we do nowadays, or around a table. I was able to like be on the peripheral side and experience it as a younger kid, knowing that I didn't really understand everything that was going on. Yeah. But that I was still welcome to like have a seat at the table without necessarily having a role, really like brought me into a place where I felt like, oh yeah, I could do this if I want to. And he never said like, oh, you have to do this. Which I think sometimes parents, like, they don't like allow their children to make choices with what they're interested in. They're like, no, you have to be into what I'm into.
You have to have the childhood that I wish I had. Effectively.
I mean, like I hear that a lot. I actually hear that from my husband Kyle as well, who, you know, very much views my dad as like, you know, I obviously like a second father, but like, because when he met my dad like accepted those aspects of himself that maybe other people in his life never understood. You know, and I've never had to go through that. So I feel like I have been very privileged. It's such a weird thing to be like, I've been a privileged nerd. Yeah. I really have been, because I had these very intelligent, very well-read, very highly educated parents who always said, it's really okay to dream. It's really okay to be creative. It's really okay to go after the things that you're interested in, and always accepted me for whatever I was interested in.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, with all that history under your belt, I'm very curious to know, is there a character that you have played that stands out above the rest as one of your favorite characters?
Oh, yeah. And actually, this is a non-tabletop related character, but I think still applies. So for a long time, I actually played in a live action role-playing game of Vampire the Masquerade.
Yep, and definitely count.
And I played a Malkavian named Dane. And she had a very non-gendered name for a reason, because this Malkavian believed as her, I don't know if you know the world of Vampire the Masquerade very well, but Malkavians are the kind of crazy clan. Oh, okay. And I always wanted to play a Malkavian that, because they typically play like, I don't know, I've seen a lot of people play them and they're like, I'm crazy, you know, like, or I'm silly, but I wanted to be the American Psycho version of of a Malkavian, like
all put together and stuff.
All put together, and you can't tell that they're crazy until whatever happens, and then you're like, holy shirt, she's crazy. Holy shirt.
Yeah.
So this character believed fundamentally that she was one of the greater demons of hell. Oh. Possessed by one of the great, like that. Okay. It took, when she turned into this vampire, she was one of these greater demons that inhabited her body. Right. And the greater demons had a certain set of rules. She, if she ever made a promise, she had to keep it, because that's how they get demons, right? And it had a certain amount of logic to do with, she had to be corrupting people. She had to have their humanity slide. And it was how she was kind of like fed emotionally and things like that. And then on top of that, I also made her a sect fanatic for the Camarilla. So the Camarilla is the secret vampire organization that keeps the world safe and the vampires safe from the world, like keeps the masquerade basically. So they, you can't tell people you're a vampire unless you turn them into a vampire, things like that. Like there's the certain laws, right? And so she was the best Camarilla member because she was crazy about it. Right? So like you think like how OCD people keep things clean. She was like that, but for the Camarilla. And so she was basically like the most business professional with this lens beneath it of this person that is literally a psychopath trying to corrupt people. And trying to get them to slide down the scale of it. So, and because it's like in person, I was able to use all of my charisma, my natural charisma that I had in person, and I was highly successful at what I did. And I feel like I did because of the lenses, because I described the derangements that I had, like this sect fanatic and this, essentially I'm like a demon, as psychological lenses that I put over my eyes to view the world through. And I felt like I really mastered getting into the RPG mindset of that character by doing that. So I knew who she was in the base. And then the one lens of being a demon in her mind, she could never remove. But she could occasionally remove with willpower the sect fanatics. So sometimes the demon got out and was able to be like, and they almost tempered each other. So she had to like do things in certain ways, like in many ways, like American Psycho, like she had to be underhanded or do things kind of sneakily. And then if she ended up making a promise that she couldn't keep, that was when like the demon of her would snap, because like that was cool. And some people told me later on that this character convinced them that Malkavians were actually like a very viable thing to play, and that you can do it subtly. But there was a lot going on mentally with these this view and these lenses that I looked through. Yeah.
That's really cool. That's like super method, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was. And I don't think that I had ever played a character that I tried to be as method with. I have been told that some of my characters literally still give people nightmares. And I don't mean to be that way, but there you go.
I'm not a bad person, really.
No, I'm really not. No.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, finally, my last question for you before we get into the episode. What is your absolute favorite thing about droids in the Star Wars universe?
Like one thing?
One thing. You have to narrow it down to one thing. What's your favorite?
Oh, favorite. It's such a weird word to use because this will not, I mean, I like most interesting is like a really, I like that there's like 6 things that I want to say and I won't say them. You're gonna have to cut so much silences, I think.
Oh, that's okay.
What is my favorite thing? I'm gonna go with my first answer. It will be classified as the most interesting thing, I would say, because it's maybe not like something that is like enjoyable to think about, but droids represent oppression and slavery in our society. And because George Lucas literally created droids to have a lowest man on the totem pole within the storytelling of Star Wars.
Yeah.
And that sometimes those droids are actually the most heroic and humane and caring beings in a Star Wars story. Like R2-D2 is considered to be, especially from George Lucas's perspective, the hero of the saga. Yeah.
He's in all of them, right?
Yes.
That's hilarious.
Because he literally has a moment in every single movie where he saves the day.
Yeah. And if it was not for R2-D2, the movies just wouldn't happen because he wouldn't have saved the day.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's always like a key clincher moment. And even up to The Last Jedi, when Luke Skywalker is looking over the bridge of the Millennium Falcon and looking around, we have this glorious moment where R2-D2 shares the "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi," hologram of Princess Leia that he still has in his databanks inside of him, and it convinces Luke to actually work with Rey, and it gets him on the path to own up to his responsibility to the galaxy and to her.
Yeah.
And to Luke, and to Ben Solo too. Like, he apologizes to Ben Solo in the end, and he was at that point denying what he had done, which I think is really fascinating. So yeah, without R2-D2, I don't think he would have been convinced.
And it's interesting that the lowest people on the totem pole are keeping everything afloat.
Yeah, exactly. And I also find that how organics in Star Wars treat droids is a very good indicator of their humanity. And, we actually very much see that slide for, Anakin as a tragic hero in Revenge of the Sith, as he basically stops caring about R2-D2 and he stops caring about C-3PO, and as he's sliding down this scale of humanity. Yeah.
Interesting. And if you would like to know more about that, there's an awesome podcast called What the Force you can listen to.
Yeah, and I do have a segment called Defragmenting Droids. I've only done R2-D2 and C-3PO so far. I'm hoping to take on a few more in the next little bit, but I find it really... droids are fascinating, and they're a very good lens to view the Star Wars universe through. And that's a very good segue to our actual topic for this episode, going into the psychology of artificial intelligence and things such as droids. Woohoo!
Yeah, so let's get on with the core of our episode. You can take your guest hat off now, Marie-Claire, if you'd like, and don the guest co-host hat. And I was talking with you during the recording for the last Cold Open on what sorts of topics we could cover. And we both got really excited about this because we both love droids and data, apparently. And the concept of artificial intelligence seems to fascinate both of us. So I wanted to dive into that topic, the topic of artificial intelligence, and try to get a better understanding of their psychology, so to speak, so that we can learn how to better play one at the table.
Sounds good. There are a lot of examples of games out there that let you play, effectively as droids, robots, artificial intelligence. Droids come from Star Wars, of course, but there's also Warforged from D&D, AI characters in Heroes Unlimited. I suppose there's probably more Android characters out there. Those are the main ones that I can think of at this point.
Yeah, there's quite a few. But I know you did a wonderful synopsis of the rule of droids on your podcast. So I think before we dive into the more general characteristics of artificial intelligence, would you want to go through what those rules were to kind of give us a sense of how Star Wars handles artificial intelligence and the rules of AI in that universe?
Yeah, sure. These were just, observational rules that I have seen, and they've been consistently applied in Star Wars to droids. So the first is all droids have a basic set of commands and directives which allow them to function in their primary roles. So every droid has a job, effectively. And as they are created or put together, assembled, they are given a protocol. And these protocols must be obeyed. So they're the basic set of, I must obey my master, things like that, which, we'll go into in a bit. But some of them also tie back to the future rules, which I will talk to you about. So like I said, they're all also slaves bound to a master. And as part of the protocols, they must obey that master, whoever is that designated person. Droids can be freed, but we've only seen one official canonized version of a freed droid.
Oh, interesting.
And it was a background character in Rogue One called Cone. And
like officially described as freed.
As a manumated droid. Yes.
Right.
L337 was probably manumated. I think it was that kind of relationship, but we never actually had a confirmation in the movie or in canon. Yeah. So I don't know.
And there was that bounty hunter in the original trilogy as well. Right?
I don't know that IG-88 is actually officially freed. I don't know if we've actually heard that.
Suspected though, right?
I mean, he's on his own. That usually means you're like on your own.
You're doing your own thing.
You're doing your own thing. Droids can feel emotion. They can feel pain. They can fear the danger, have fears of danger or fear being destroyed. So they are programmed with effectively humanistic emotions and pain receptors. So like there's this glorious scene in Return of the Jedi where, the droid master of Jabba's palace is like, you'll soon learn some respect. And in the background, you see a droid being flipped over and having his feet burned.
Yeah.
Like, what? Droids have dreams in standby mode, and they have to power down to process things. We see this happen a couple of times with C-3PO especially. They defragment, they build new subroutines, and they make sure that they're in good working order. So they basically sleep. They also need to have power and recharge regularly. They are considered to be, and this is directly from George Lucas, the appliances of the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it's like, they're like Roombas or like toasters. Like, why would you ever so you have to get around. This is probably some good advice for people who are playing with droids. What is your psychology with a droid? What are your pre-biases that you've got? Like, do you view them as appliances or do you view them more humanistically, that they are actual, creations doing work, contributing to society? Right? And we've had both of those explored in recent canon, which is really fascinating.
Yeah.
They believe in a higher power. It's the Maker. We hear C-3PO refer to the Maker all the time. Thank the Maker, and it's in their base binary programming. So how all droids are programmed, the Maker is part of that code, which is fascinating. Why does that exist?
Yeah.
And it's an exception for droids to lie. R2-D2s or R2 units being more prone to being able to write new subroutines, change their programming, change their bodies to accommodate different needs. They don't lie very often, and because they really don't see the point of it. Like, what's the point of lying? Right. So sometimes they don't save people's feelings either, because that's a lie in some ways.
That makes
sense. Droids that you don't wipe develop complex personalities. It's like the theory of consciousness. The more experiences and things that you've gone through, the more your understanding of your own mentality develops. And it allows them to go way beyond what they've been programmed for, or develop new things, including like artistry or, C-3PO is now a spy master in the sequel trilogy, whereas all he really wants to do is plan weddings or events. Let C-3PO plan some weddings.
Yep. Hashtag.
In addition to that, other properties, other areas will probably more rely on the 3 rules of Asimov's robotics.
Oh, yeah. So Asimov wrote some books, and in some of those books, goes over the basically the 3 laws of robotics, which are, I believe, designed for robots to not hurt people. Like, you have to do this with all robots, otherwise bad things will happen, is, I think, the theory behind these 3 laws. So the first one is a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. So don't hurt people, basically. A robot must obey orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. So this sounds like for robots that are specifically designed to be underlings of humanity.
And I would say that the droids in the Star Wars universe do not actually have Asimov's laws.
No. It's like almost there a little bit. It's like, obey us, but you can still kill the people we tell you to kill.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting because it's like, it's about,
well, we have the battle droids. We have the battle droids that are literally trying to kill Jedi in the prequels and in the Clone Wars cartoon, right? So the Asimov rules do not apply to Star Wars.
No. It's an interesting lens of how different universes and different things would handle artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and I would say that if you're going to play in a world that maybe hasn't thought through this, all it has to be is relatively logical. I would say why there's so much emotion and so much how the Star Wars universe handles droids is really because Star Wars is modern day fairy tale and modern day myth, right? So it's got this very mythological feel. So they are filling the place of a humanistic character in the story. Just that they happen to be the lowest form of respectable life out there. Whereas Asimov is very science fiction based, and I would say that even Data has a different set of rules than necessarily the Asimov laws. So when you're creating a character, whatever universe you're creating in that will be this, you have to decide on how logical their logic will be, how the world themselves view this will view this like this race in some ways, right? And then what are the logical lenses that apply to this character? And if you can view it like that, you will have a set of guidelines of almost if then this logic that you can apply, and it will help you be more robotic. Or, if you're playing a Vulcan, you could just use that for being a Vulcan.
That's a very good point. It's interesting with Asimov's laws. It almost feels like it's designed for non-sentient robotics, non-sentient artificial intelligence, which is kind of an interesting concept. I don't know.
Talk about toasters.
I know, right? it very much like the assembly line robot, the really smart refrigerators, things like that can tell you when you're out of milk or almost out of milk and then order it for you. Yeah,
exactly.
But we can't really, I don't know. Can you play a non-sentient robot? Is that like human?
I would say
feasible.
I don't know. It doesn't sound very interesting.
It doesn't.
Like even like the character in, I'm just going to talk about the iRobot movie. The character in iRobot that is the robot by which we identify with is sentient. And we even identify more with the artificial intelligence that has taken matters into her own hands in that movie.
Yeah.
because she is sentient. I don't know that you can play a non-sentient robot because they have to have a certain amount of self-reflection to be able to play and to be able to play them.
It would almost be like, okay, what are my rules of how I can act? And now I have to follow these rules in every scene. And that doesn't sound too interesting at all. No,
it sounds kind of boring. Whereas like with sentience, at least you can question the programming. You probably have a base set of programming that you would like the if then this rules. But then there's the what if something falls outside of those rules, and that's when the sentience has to make a decision about something new and be creative and all of that.
Yeah.
I think it's more important to understand the rules of how the universe treats your robot character than necessarily putting restrictions internally, other than maybe a few things like I must obey my master, or I must do X, Y, Z, and maybe just create one or two lenses to view your robot world through is probably enough to give you that feel and that sense that you are portraying that character genuinely.
Yeah, exactly. And you already mentioned the robot and the artificial intelligence from iRobot.
Yeah.
Those are really great examples of like a sentient AI in pop culture right now.
Well, they have agency. I think that's the key is like you're playing a character that has agency.
Yeah.
And if you don't have agency, whether you think you're alive or not, or you think you have your own brain or not, if you have no agency, then you're not really a character that you can play. You're a bot.
Yeah. Well, if you expand upon that, just the core concept of role-playing as a character in a role-playing game, if you're playing, a quote-unquote flesh and blood character, if you don't have agency, it's not that fun. If the GM says, okay, this is what you're doing, and you say, okay, I want to do this, and the GM says, this is exactly what you do and how it plays out, and I'm telling you the whole story, and you're like, well, that's not what I wanted. It doesn't feel that great.
It doesn't, no, because then, like, why are you even showing up at the game? Yeah.
So agency seems like it's a very important component.
I think so, of any character.
Yeah, of any character, and especially droids, because you don't want to play a droid that doesn't have agency.
And I would say, like, even there's some flexibility with the I must obey my master conversation, right? Because I must obey my master, and how strict are you viewing those rules, right? Like, I must obey my master, like, if you're an R2-D2, he will straight up lie. And as long as his master didn't explicitly say do not do X, he is still free to do what he wants. Whereas a C-3PO will be like, this is not a good idea, and it almost grates on his consciousness and his conscience more, because it's against what he thinks should happen.
Well, it's kind of like the monkey's paw scenario, where if you're not exactly precise, there's a lot of wiggle room for interpretation.
Yeah. And what's that lens that you view? Do you view your master's, word as law, or are you going to lawyer it?
Right.
Right. If that is one of your, like, sort of rules for your droid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some other examples from media that we can think of that are good examples for people to kind of look at in terms of how artificial intelligent characters
I do want to bring up one more from Star Wars, which is that we got a really great example of L337 from Solo. But I would recommend, if you're interested in playing like a Star Wars droid, actually read one of the books that has one of those characters as a POV in universe, because it'll give you a very good feel for how that character thinks about things. Right. And that gives you the lens instantly to play that character and to view the world through, because it gives you a very good example live, and L337 is in the Solo novelization. She's got a couple of other books where she's a POV, like Lost Shot. You can view certain things from C-3PO and R2-D2's perspective in certain books. even BB-8 gets some really, really adorably cute novelization POV in The Last Jedi, where he's basically like, he almost describes himself as a spy droid. It's so cute. Like, it's unbelievably cute. So, you know, you don't even have to necessarily be a droid that can communicate with people. Like, you could basically play a mute that can only communicate in binary. But I think that that like source material is very, it's very good to dig into if you really want to give it like a really good understanding of that POV.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting, as I was kind of putting together a list of examples of different robotic and AI characters in media, I found that there's quite the range from like, you know, the Star Wars droids to like the Kit from Knight Rider, who's literally an AI car.
There's 2001 Space Odyssey, the ship's computer.
Oh yeah, HAL.
HAL, yeah. That's a really interesting idea. And that's like logic, like bent, you know, like if you want to play like an evil campaign or whatever with an idea, like that's how you kind of use it against the universe. Yeah.
And then we get into like the android type characters like Data from Star Trek, who has certain limitations. No contractions, no emotions at first. Yeah. All that sort of fun stuff.
And also has limitations to do with harming humans.
Yes.
He can't kill. He's kind of like a genie.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but Data is an excellent example. Like, you can watch any of his episodes and see like how he handles and I love that they gave him a lens of wanting to be more human from the first episode. Like he literally is like, by the way, this is my backstory. I want to be a human. Like in the Mission to Farpoint, like he literally says that on the holodeck when he's introduced to Riker. Like what? By the way, I wish I was more human. Yeah. Thanks.
And the episodes where he plays Sherlock Holmes are especially fascinating.
Yeah.
Because you can see, I think there was also an episode where he was doing some Shakespeare with Jean-Luc Picard.
Yes.
On the holodeck. And it's interesting that he kind of portrays this like emotion and excitement, but then as soon as he drops that character, which is literally just a subroutine act.
Yeah, like he's taken like famous versions of it and like combined it together. And I love how in the one episode with his mother, quote unquote, who was Noonien Sung's wife.
Yeah.
But she's actually also a android, but with like more complex programming where she actually has emotion and she doesn't think she's an android, which is like a really fascinating go down that route. That was cool. And then you find out you're a robot. Oh my God, that would be crazy. But I love that like in that episode, we actually determine that there's certain things about Data that are actually even humanistic, even though he doesn't view them as that. Like he plays music and he combines technically proficient versions of playing the music, combines them together because he likes certain aspects of them, and he combines them to be able to play the violin in like his own way, which I really appreciate that he was actually creative.
Yeah.
And he had a logic on how he was going to be creative. Like that's just a really interesting thing.
Yeah. And then there was Spot, his cat.
Yes, Spot. Yes.
That he I think, do I remember correctly? Did he like do baby talk to the cat as well?
Oh yeah. No, he baby talks to Spot. Yeah.
It's really interesting that he doesn't have, you know, quote unquote emotions, but he has all of these very humanistic qualities.
And he worries about Spot. Like when he had to go away and he gave Spot to Worf to like take care of, and Worf's like allergic, and he's like, you must call him Good Spot and give him treats.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then he has that relationship with Tasha Yar in the first season, ever so briefly when she's like all horny. Yeah, I mean, like there was some really cool, interesting things applied to that, and I think that you could get to some really wacky places by just setting up what is your framework and then exploring situations with your character.
Yeah, and there's so many different like other android type characters out there. I mean, if you can probably count the Terminator.
Yeah.
From the Terminator franchise.
Yep.
Was it the T300 and
the
T1000 models and probably any number in between. Those ones seem a lot more robotic in a way.
But like the relationship that, especially in Terminator 2, the Terminator has with the people around him is really cool.
Yeah.
Whereas like the T1000 is just more like, I'm a killer robot, blah, 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 blah. More like what Terminator was in the first movie.
Yeah. It almost seems like the T1000 was more just of a weapon.
Yeah.
That could transform and
And that cool effect with the like liquid silver metal. Still haunting. Like when the T1000 like sticks its face through the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
the
good.
Androids from Humans, which was not a very long run show. I think you could probably catch up on it if you were interested in it.
2-3 seasons.
Yeah, but
I heard there was another one coming, but I don't know.
I thought it was canceled.
Was it?
I thought it was. I thought it was, but J.J. Abrams created. He also did the theme song because he's a brilliant composer and director. And this one actually poses some really fascinating, interesting questions in universe about, androids, their rights, what they're allowed to do and like how they're treated and, what is their history and like, it's very interesting sci-fi.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed that series quite a lot. And it dives into some really, really cool like parts of how you can go from a non-sentient robot android to a sentient android with the proper programming. And what does that imply?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. And that kind of goes along the same lines as the replicants from Blade Runner 2, right?
Yes. Although
where
there's a challenge with that one because some of them don't know that they're replicants.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is super fascinating as well.
Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting twist for a DM to do, which would be like you've created a character and you're like a normal character, and then the DM actually changes it halfway through and tells you that you're actually a robot. I think that would be like personal horror to the extreme. Chef's kiss.
It would be a fantastic storyline with the right group.
Oh yeah, they would have to be up for it, and
you'd almost have to frame it as one of you may turn out to be like an android or something like that. I don't know if I would say if the I know the players I play with would never have a problem with me pulling a twist like that on them. But I would say it's up to the sensitivity of your group. Yeah, because you definitely don't want to take away somebody's agency with that sort of storyline. Especially if you're playing a character that has, aspirations for after this is done, I want to settle down and start a family and all that sort of stuff. But oops, you're an android.
I mean, just put that personal horror tag on there. And then you signed the small print user agreement. Sorry. No, I'm just kidding. No, I agree. It has to be with the right person and the right players and everything like that. I think it would be really cool if they all found out that they were actually androids, because then they would be like all in it together. It's just kind of like a very interesting, now I want to run a game like this.
That does sound super fun, actually. And then the last examples I had were Vision and Ultron. from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the comics, of course.
Which Vision is fascinating because he ends up still having a relationship with Scarlet Witch.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's both robot and magic, I guess.
Human.
Depending on how you view the what is it? Which one does he have?
He's got the mind stone. Yeah.
The mind stone, yeah.
I mean, they kind of explained away that all of these things are actually science in some ways, but
yeah.
I mean, magic is something that exists in universe, so magic is just science you don't understand yet.
I guess. I mean, technically, in all these games, it's there's a craft to learn these things, or you're born with it for a reason, or it's given to you, somehow. Like
you could probably turn the Marvel Cinematic Universe into a Darths and Droids type webcomic where they're playing D&D.
Oh yeah.
Very easily.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so that was a lot of different characters, a lot of different types of characters out there in the actual pop culture, and tons more, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the commonalities between all of these different characters? And I got a good one.
So they're so different. Like, what do you got?
Agency, which we already mentioned, but also some sort of relationship with humanity, right? So is it a master-servant relationship? Is it a trying to become normal? Is it hidden within humanity? Very, very replicants from Blade Runner. There's either a seeking to understand or a seeking to be, or, I am powerless to, or I have power over, in some ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's interesting that even the ones that are created for very specific purposes, it was their relationship with the quote unquote humanity or organic sentience is that they were created by them.
Yes.
In one way, shape, or form. Either someone organic created the first one, who then created subsequent, artificial intelligent robots and started that chain, or directly created, or like in a factory or something like that.
Yeah, that seems to be a pretty common thread for robots or droids or AIs in it, that this is like a man versus machine theme that is played out, in this fiction, that what we create may eventually destroy us, idea. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's interesting because all of robotics, all of artificial intelligence in pretty much all media is handled by programming of some sort.
Yes.
There's basic code that can be deciphered by a human mind that controls all of this, creates all of this agency, creates the, I don't want to say the appearance of emotions, because it goes down some really interesting philosophical rabbit holes.
Yes.
Right? Because if you have an AI and you program it to have happiness, sadness, sorrow, satisfaction, all that sort of stuff, is it actually experiencing those emotions, or is it its programming that's telling it that it's experiencing those emotions? Yeah.
But I mean, that's what we are. We are just we're the sum of our organic programming.
Yeah.
Right. Because we have instincts, and we have, base reflexes that are programmed into our brains with our genetic memory to help us survive. Right. So we're born with these instincts, and we're born with these DNA reflexes that are built into our, DNA, which then is built into our brain structure to function in certain ways. And from a psychological perspective, humanity, you know to react to a spider because it is scary looking. That is like one of the instincts we have, because back on the plains and, when we lived in caves, if a spider bit you, you could die. So you have this fear reaction to spiders, but you do not have necessarily a fear reaction of putting a fork into an electrical outlet, which is actually more dangerous to you.
Yeah. That's interesting.
That's why we have to keep babies away from electrical outlets.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas they're afraid of spiders.
Exactly. And why we have to teach these things. You learn from being a baby, growing up with people. They teach you these things. You grow up more. You learn on your own. You start to learn things on your own through your experiences in life. Follows the exact same path as an artificial intelligence doing machine learning algorithms and doing, self-teaching by self-learning algorithms to get their own view of the world and how to act within that world.
Yep. But then there's a slight theme of, the idea that these robots or droids were created by humanity means that they will always be other.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yes, you grow up and you exist, but you will always be apart because you are unique compared to an organic.
Yeah.
Cool.
I would say, on the whole, there's probably going to be some people, and there's examples within these media that accept these androids as equals.
Yes.
And as a part of that same society.
Yep.
And there's people that go even further and obsess over, the fact of artificial intelligence, and a
really great book for that would be Last Shot. Where actually the a human actually obsesses over the aspects of how droids deserve to be able to have flesh.
Interesting.
So it's kind of like the Data conversation in First Contact with the Borg Queen, that she gives him flesh and stuff like that, and there's actually
actual flesh.
There's a really cool read Last Shot by Daniel Jose Older. It's amazing.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you've got this separation on a society level, but then down to the individual, you can have all sorts of views, all sorts of arrays on how artificial intelligent people, characters in these worlds are actually treated.
Yes.
So that's pretty cool.
Very.
And I put a note in here about that their personalities were mostly consistent, but I don't think that's true at all. I think they do grow. Yeah,
because it's much like as you collect experiences, it's the theory of consciousness that you will grow and change and adapt to new situation with new stimuli. We see, especially in Star Wars, we see actually some fairly good examples of this. And C-3PO is actually going to be the one that I was going to use as the reference. So in A New Hope, Luke is talking to him about, his experience out in space and with the rebellion. And he's like, I'm sorry, I'm not a very good storyteller. I'm not very good at telling stories. And then in Return of the Jedi, he's literally telling a story to a bunch of fuzzballs, murder bears, as we call them, Ewoks, in the Forest Moon of Endor, all about the adventures that they've been having. He actually had grown in that direction to actually say, well, actually, I am a storyteller, and this is now my role within the group. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. And he did it in audio drama format with sound effects and everything.
I know, right? There was and the music behind the scene is filled with a Ewok version of a leitmotif, which is cool.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So it really sounds like most AI are limited by their programming, but that programming does allow for growth and improvement. So how does an AI grow if it's stuck following its programming?
So like similar to what I mentioned with the droid rules, I feel like it's this standby mode where they literally write new subroutines for themselves. And AI now does that, right?
Yeah.
If they're allowed to program themselves, which some AIs have the ability to learn from their experiences and program new subroutines and learn and create new programming for themselves, then that's how they learn. And that's how they create new ways of dealing with situations.
Yeah. And even down to like the Roomba level.
Yes.
They're getting to the point where they learn your room and they learn the layout. And that combined with their sensors allows them to grow their internal map of your environment.
Yes.
And then they can do more efficient, cleaning of your floors, for instance.
Even Google knows that I'm going on a vacation and will remind me of certain things as I'm getting closer to that vacation.
Which is a little creepy, but
I mean, we're all experiencing the uncanny valley with artificial intelligence as it becomes more complex.
Yeah.
And at some point it will just become super creepy as it anticipates.
Yeah. And for your character, if you're going to be playing an AI in a role-playing game, you could go the machine learning route. You could go the self-programming route. But you could also go with like upgrades, physical or software upgrades.
Yeah, that would be really fascinating. Like, I got to go in this shop and it's very like, I don't know, like Tin Man in Wizard of Oz, or like that kind of idea. Or I need a new processor. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very cyberpunk sort of idea. I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think that would be a really interesting way to do it. I certainly get the impression that at least with like the people that are street samurais and like in like Shadowrun, they have to do that upgrade thing, right? Because it's just not something that is built. But they might also. I saw a really interesting Star Wars character played once on an actual play. This was Never Tell Me the Odds.
Okay.
Where the droid was obsessed with upgrading his physical body.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was really interesting.
I think one of the droids in our Star Wars Edge of the Empire series was also obsessed with upgrading either themselves or their ship. I can't remember. I wanted to say it was themselves, but they weren't able to, so they were upgrading the ship instead. And
I think that you could take, psychological things like the people that get tons and tons of plastic surgery and view that through the lens of a droid. Like, what does depression look like from a droid perspective? Well, you probably get Marvin the paranoid android from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. What do these things look like what do these very humanistic conditions look like as droids? I think that would be really fascinating to explore as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I know Data, he eventually does get, spoiler alert for like 20 years ago, he does eventually get an emotion chip that doesn't short circuit him.
Yeah.
And it gives him the emotions, and it gives him the ability to use contractions finally, because emotions...
And dream. He's got the dream subroutine, which is some of the coolest Freudian stuff that, you've seen on TV. And he literally talks to Freud in his dreams, which is really funny.
I think, was it the first episode where he gets the faulty emotion chip that he dreams of the forge and the raven's feather and all that really bizarre stuff? It
was because the ship itself was being infected by these microorganisms that were feeding on the ship and on the humans on the ship.
Yeah.
And he could only tell that because he could hear them but couldn't process it in his consciousness.
Oh, yeah.
It was a very interesting psychological episode.
And that's kind of an interesting point for Gatebusters, I think, is if you have a droid or an AI character that you are writing a story for, and they have the capability to dream, you can really give some interesting cryptic stuff in their dreams that probably goes beyond like what a normal person would be able to dream.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah. Especially if it's somebody tapping into your dream subroutines and forcing you to dream those things to give you those clues directly.
I mean, I feel like that's been done like in fantasy type scenarios where people like are like cursing your dreams or whatever, and you're like getting these cool things, and that would be a really cool way to play it out from a robot perspective.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So how do we bring this all to our characters at the table?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Like we talked a bit about it while we were talking through all these various points. I would say first, you have to understand how artificial intelligence works in the setting that you're going to be playing it in. Because droids are completely different, I would say, than Data in Star Trek. And that's very different from the Warforged in Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah, I mean, like if you're playing in Star Wars, feel free to use the rules, that we outlined in this one. But each universe almost has its own set of how the characters are treated, how they behave. So you kind of have to think that through a little bit and maybe make sure that to discuss it with your DM or your GM or your storyteller to make sure that, it all kind of aligns with what they think about the universe too.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't just playing... You could probably get away with playing like a droid type character, how a normal droid acts in like a Star Trek universe. That would be pretty one for one, I would say. But it would be weird.
Yeah.
Right? And you could probably play a Data type character in Star Wars, but it would be a lot more advanced in especially the looks department. In terms of how droids are viewed in that universe, right?
Yes.
One of the biggest parts about Data is he looks human. It's just he's not. Whereas droids rarely look human at all. Yeah,
very rarely are they actually covered with like synthetic skin too. Sometimes they are in Star Wars, but yes, they very purposefully don't look humanoid. They look human-esque. Like even C-3PO is like human cyborg relations. Like it's like he very much is there to help facilitate the relationship between droids and humans. And he looks humanoid in shape, but not in appearance.
Can't even move his mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different stuff that you could play with there, but you have to keep in mind that if you're going to be more advanced than everything else in the universe, it's going to be a little weird. If you're less advanced than everything else, it's also going to be a little weird.
Like trying to play a mouse droid in a RPG would be very difficult, I think.
Sentient mouse droid?
Sentient mouse droid, yeah. I mean, mouse droids are sentient. They understand things. Your ship, your toaster, your cooking appliance is always a droid. And
that's true.
Everything in Star Wars understands you. It's just they might have less of a level of sentience than other things, right? But they remember. And eventually, if you're an old enough mouse droid, sure, you'd be super sentient.
Yeah. I know the Redemption podcast, one of their main characters, R3A1, the R3 units normally communicate in the bleeps and the bloops, right? But they actually installed a voice modulator on the droid so that the droid could talk in like common. Yeah. Galactic Common, I guess it's called. And that gets around a lot of the like translation sort of issues that you have in the game.
Well, like L337 in the Solo movie is actually an adapted R2 type unit.
That's right.
She's self-modified to give herself legs and things like that. and give herself a vocalization.
Interesting.
Yes.
So it looks like you can take the existing framework of the rules of characters, and modify it in terms of a sense that's logical to that universe.
Yeah.
To create your own character that has its own personality, which is really cool.
Yeah, I would say modified droids are a really cool way to go about it in Star Wars, and I would say you can probably do a twist on something that exists in the world itself, as long as like kind of the DM is along for the ride, just so that they can make sure to frame the universe correctly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know in Heroes Unlimited particularly, there are just hundreds of options for your robotic character, and it even gets down to the nitty-gritty of like, which processor do you want, and what you have to spend money on all these different little parts to create your character. Do you want synthetic skin or do you not want synthetic skin? A little bit extra money. So it's all dependent on the budget that you roll in the beginning. And I think some droids run on batteries, some run on like nuclear power that doesn't go bad for like 10 years or something like that. It's really interesting, the like detail that some of these games actually have in full customization for your robot character, like different levels of like intelligence points. And different mental stat points and stuff like that.
Like, I really like thinking about R2-D2 from a D&D perspective, like in Darths and Droids, like the webcomic, where it is, they're playing through the Star Wars universe, basically like it's a D&D campaign. And effectively R2-D2 is a munchkin because he's got all of these skills, like advanced skills and high intelligence, but he's a dwarf and he's a mute. Right, like that's, and like when he takes over, that player character, when he takes over as the dungeon master for a game, somehow R2-D2 has like rocket jets, and that's in the prequels when he flies around in the Attack of the Clones droid factory.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah, so there's all sorts of different options that you can go with once you understand how what the limitations are and what sort of level of everything that you have to keep in mind with how these androids and artificial intelligence function within the universe that you're going to be playing in.
Yep.
So one thing to keep in mind is that all AI is defined by their programming. So does your character's programming allow for self-improvement, or do you have to actually make upgrades either through purchasing parts or through like software improvements from an external source? So that's definitely something to keep in mind when you're creating these types of characters.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because also it'll play into like a really interesting concept, like especially if you need to be recharged, you have to be near power, right? So if you end up in the wilderness, it has kind of this horror aspect, right? Like because you're not near charging stations. And it's actually a through line in some of the Star Wars canon materials where droids talk about how they don't like to be in the outer rim because there's not as many civilization means they're further away from power to recharge.
Yeah. And it's interesting that the droids in Star Wars have, that built-in self-preservation. Yeah. Like even with the pain thing that we were talking about before. Yeah. It's like the reason pain exists in organic sentient people and animals and, anything organic basically is to say, hey, something's wrong. You need to save yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And they do have that self-preservation built into their programming.
Yeah. Just kind of opens the alley for upside down foot torture.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And threatening of droids, right? Like, so, and fear. They have fear themselves.
And I imagine that if a droid makes a solid connection with organic companions, fear of their safety would probably be something that they would write in as a subroutine, so to speak.
Yeah, and they also have passion and desires and things like that eventually as well. Loyalty.
Yeah.
You know, they experience emotions just like humans. It's just really fascinating that they're treated like the lowest thing in the Star Wars universe.
Exactly. So what sort of stories do we want to tell with our characters is another question that you want to kind of ask yourself as you're designing your artificial intelligent character, right?
Yeah, and I would say that these would be the same for any character that you were playing. Like, what are the things that they most desire or wish for? What are their goals? What do they want to try to attain? Because that will color, you know, their view through the lens of their particular programming logic of what they're striving for, like Data, you know, wanting to be human.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Or wanting to experience, you know, life.
Yes.
Well, I guess that's like Pinocchio syndrome.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much Data is Pinocchio.
Yeah.
Yes. Data is Pinocchio. But other droids have different desires. Like, C-3PO just wants to be a protocol droid that plans events. And, you know, that's very much what he really, really wants to do. R2-D2 really wants to be the hero. And so he ends up kind of going in that direction a lot of the time. Some stories involve, you know, droid rights or like humans, which is trying to find power or, you know, find acceptance within this human world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And then one of the other things I thought of is how sentient are you?
Yeah.
You know, I would say that there with an android and an artificial intelligent character, you have the option to do a very interesting array of, like, it's not just fully sentient or not. You could be mostly sentient. You could be a little bit sentient. You have choice in everything, but for the most part, you're an appliance, I guess you could say.
Exactly. And right? I mean, the appliance thing is how they are treated in universe. It's not necessarily that they aren't sentient, because they are, and some of them realize what their place in the galaxy is, and sometimes they don't, or they don't care because the protocols in their base programming are there. And again, I'll call to Solo and L337 and how she talks to the droids that she frees in the spice mines of Kessel, or in the mines of Kessel, or in the Quaxium mine of Kessel. But L337 is like, you know, look past your programming, free yourselves. And they're like, what do we do? And she's like, I don't know, go free your brothers and sisters. It's like they still needed orders because they weren't ready for, you know, this sentience, this freedom, this feeling of manumission that they were experiencing from her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think the last thing that you might want to think about is, how do you want your character to talk with the group, with the story? What is their voice going to be like, you know? Yeah,
like, is it very monotone? Do you talk like HK-47 from Knights of the Old Republic? Statement, meatbag, you should not be doing this.
Yes.
You know. Or, you know, is there something that you actually use to modulate your voices? And I had a friend who had, it was like a Pringles container, or it was like a tin can, like, that had, like, I don't know, popcorn or something in it from Christmas. And he would use it and to give his voice this like tinny sound whenever he was speaking in character. And it's simple stuff like that. Like, you just keep it by you, and you're like, whenever you're talking in character, you're like, let's see if I can do this with my water cup, and it'll modulate it. Like, hello, this is my voice. And like, if you do that enough, like, you'll get used to it. It was very ridiculous in the beginning to actually see him like hold this can up to his face and be like, hello. But it changes your voice enough that you sound other. And that's part of the, one of the important things to keep in mind, is that you are other if there's a bunch of organics around you.
Yeah, exactly. Or in the case of our Star Wars series on this podcast, my character was the only organic amongst robots.
That's awesome.
Totally not planned.
Oh yeah, this was the character that was like raised by robots?
This was the character that was raised by robots because he was taken away from the Jedi Temple by the Jedi Temple librarian after Order 66 was handed out.
Jocasta New saved you?
I don't know. It was one of the player characters.
Oh, okay. So maybe one of the other librarians.
One of the other librarians.
That's so fascinating because there's a new book out called Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray, and there's a character in it named Pax, and he was actually raised by robots when it kind of in a chance circumstance. Not the same as yours, but like raised basically by protocol droids.
Yeah, I think it was there was a protocol droid, there was an R2 unit, there was one of those weird bug-eyed android, or the humanoid. I forget what it's called. I think I wanted to say it was like I can't remember off the top of my head. And then a battle droid from the Separatists.
Oh, nice.
Army. A captain battle droid that didn't have an army to command anymore and was slowly losing his mind on an abandoned Separatist base.
That's awesome.
We ended up calling home.
That's awesome. No, I mean, I think that would be a very motley crew to raise a child. But yeah, no, that's it. That's cool that there was actually a now in canon character that was raised by a bunch of pros too, which is
that's really
a cool way to deal with it.
Yeah. So it seems like we covered a lot.
Oh yeah.
On this topic, and I really love some of the philosophical stuff that we really dove into here. Is there anything else that we want to cover before we go? I
would say, have fun with it, because it will be just such an other experience for you, I think, if you've never played a robot or a droid character before. And there's a lot of philosophical questions that you get to ask yourself when you play them and get into that mindset. Right.
Yeah. As long as you are having fun, that's pretty much the point of playing. As long as everybody's having fun and you're telling a good story, and if you want to explore this sort of almost alien mindset, just dive in. Yeah. There's plenty of examples in pop culture to look at and say, that's kind of what I want to play.
Exactly.
And then just play it.
Exactly.
Well, very cool. Well, thank you so much again, Marie-Claire, for co-hosting a second time while Amelia's away.
You're most welcome.
Yeah. Can you go ahead and remind everyone where they can find you online if they want to contact you or look more into what you've been up to?
Sure. So I'm involved with a couple of projects, but my personal Twitter is Marie-C Gould online or on Twitter. And my show that I host for Star Wars is called What the Force, and our Twitter is WT Force Show. If you're interested in me as a role player, you can check out Tavern Tales, which is at @Tavern_Tales on Twitter. If you really, really like the sound of my voice and are also into Asian dramas, you can check me out on the Asian drama pod Fall For It, which is at @FallForIt_drama. And recently I have written and directed a audio drama called Fangirls, which is now on its second episode, which just came out, and it's very enjoyable. It's about a bunch of fangirls that are really into Star Wars that are trying to see episode 9 before it comes out.
Mm-hmm. And it's really
well, thank you.
Awesome. Well, it was great having you along for this discussion. Thank you. And thanks to everyone else out there for listening. We will see you next time.
Bye.
Character Evolution Cast, like Character Creation Cast, is a production of the One Shot Podcast Network and can be found online at www.charactercreationcast.com. Head to the website to get more information on our hosts and guests, or even to find some of our character sheet. Character Creation Cast can be found on Twitter at CreationCast. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Bolter, and I can be found on Twitter at Lord Neptune or online at lordneptune.com. Our guest host for this episode, Marie-Claire Gould, can be found on Twitter at Marie C. Gould or at WT Force Show. Music for this episode is used with a Creative Commons license or with permission from the podcast it originated from. Further information can be found within the show notes. This episode was edited by Ryan Bolter. Further information for the game systems discussed and today's guests can also be found in the show note. Thanks for joining us, and remember, we find that the best part of any role-playing game is character creation. So go out there and create some amazing people. We will see you next time.
Now we gotta read some show blurbs.
Show blurbs.
Show blurbs.
Show blurbs.
Show blurbs. Character Creation Cast is hosted by the One Shot Podcast Network. If you enjoyed our show, visit oneshotpodcast.com, where you'll find other great shows like Asians Represent.
Asians Represent celebrates Asian creators and diversity in the gaming community. Join hosts Agatha Chang and Daniel Kwan as they discuss gaming, genre, and representation with their guests, and occasionally argue with each other to the sound of Agatha's beloved air horn app.